You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by the National Association of Convenience Stores.
Welcome. This is Jeff Lenard with the National Association of Convenience Stores, and Convenience Matters is about all things that matter to convenience stores, and if it matters to convenience stores, it probably matters to consumers because convenience matters more to them. We get about half of the U.S. population at convenience stores on a daily basis, so they want to know what's going on with convenience stores. What are we doing? What are we thinking? How are we helping them make their lives more convenient? And today, what we're going to talk about is what's going on with one of the topics that's gained some traction in the news, skimming. What is skimming? Where can you find it? How can you avoid it? What are all the dynamics related to skimming? And today, our guest is Gray Taylor. He's the executive director of Connexus, which is a technology standards arm, if you will, of NACS, and they are very involved with how do we help people identify skimmers and avoid skimmers and give us a lay of the landscape. So first off, welcome, Gray.
It's good to be here, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me.
We'll start with a real basic question for anybody that has no idea of a skimmer. What is a skimmer, and why should we care about what's going on with them?
You know, skimmers are probably one of the oldest forms of card data fraud or payment card data fraud. It's been around really since the mag stripe was invented in cards, and a lot of people aren't old enough to remember when credit cards didn't even use mag stripes back in the 80s. Magnetic stripes in the back of cards were introduced, and at that point, that data became replicable. While it was very difficult to get the equipment to exfiltrate the data from the mag stripe, long about the tech revolution, about when we were getting online and enjoying cheap PCs, all of a sudden it became fairly easy to get that data off a card, and it got pretty easy, not too expensive, to put that data back on another card. So skimming has been around since the mid-'90s. I actually had my first skimming experience. I was at a coffee shop in New York City in 1998, and I handed my card. As at the old days, you handed your card to the cashier, who took it to the back room and swiped it. And apparently this one swiped it a second time. And next thing I knew, I was buying $1,500 worth of baseball caps from Puerto Rico. And so it's been around since 1990, and it really is an easy crime to get into nowadays. The technology is cheap, and it's available on eBay.
How'd your team do that year?
Yeah, I got the call from Citibank saying, "Are you trying to buy $1,500 worth of baseball caps from Puerto Rico?" And I said, "No," and they said, "We didn't think so." So
it's a pretty strong bench. So I think one of the first things that people assume is skimmers are essentially the same as data breaches. And so you read about tens of millions of credit cards getting identity fraud, et cetera. Skimmers are a little different because I think the way I understand them, what you're doing is essentially cloning a card, and it's almost more of a piecemeal operation. A skimmer collects a card, and then somebody takes that information and creates a new card. It's not about compromised data. First off, is that the best way to describe it? And why are convenience stores particularly involved with this issue?
Sure. You know, actually, when you look back at the Target breach and the TJ Maxx breach and so forth, that was the same cattle as, what's getting skimmed at our stores. They're both headed for slaughter, which is getting cloned into some sort of payment device. What differentiates the two is one is a physical contact. It's what we call a high involvement hack. And subsequently, it also has traditionally low card volume. So in other words, you have to be there to physically get that card data. It's not floating around in data space. And you're traditionally not getting as many cards, but nobody knows you've done it if you've done it right. Whereas with Target, you're getting a boatload of cards, and you might not be getting all the track 1, track 2 data, but you're getting just enough to clone another card. And so they all end up being cards at some point or being used online, what we call card not present fraud. So that's the big difference. The other big difference is expertise involved. Skimming involves very little expertise. As I said, you can buy skimmers at eBay. You can get skimmers that fit in gas pumps on an eBay website. You can certainly buy them from the dark market, but I'm amazed at how places on the regular web where you can go in and buy these things. And you can even buy overlays for gas pumps, for ATMs, and so forth that you can use to put a skimmer in it. So the equipment's available, and the cloning equipment is also available. So for a very low investment, you can get into the hacking game. You don't even have to be a hacker. You don't even have to have gone to computer, been a hacker. Whereas going in and getting into Target requires a lot of skills, increasingly, it's taking more and more skills because our technology in protecting data is getting better and better. So what we're seeing is, and topically we saw in the last 6 months, is we've seen this escalation in skimming news. And it's not just on gas pumps. It's at bank vestibule ATMs. It's in-store ATMs, privately held, bank-held ATMs, our dispensers, and even the point-of-sale terminals that are sitting in front of a cashier. And primarily, I think it's because it's so easy. It's a mail-order business. It's so easy to get into, and it's so easy now to sell the card data. If you go to any presentation of the Secret Service, they'll actually take you to dark websites where it's almost like trading stock. Here is a gold MasterCard that we guarantee is good, and we'll sell it to you for $3. And so it's very fungible on the back end.
And skimmers, I'm glad you mentioned your experience with the coffee shop, because there are different kinds of skimmers. So you have the kind where might be more likely a restaurant experience where you hand somebody your card and they go with it. And that is something where what they'll do is they'll do the swipe that's required to process the business transaction, and then they may have some sort of handheld thing where they do the second swipe. That's not that common in our industry, so we'll set that aside for a second. And then you talk about the ones that do affect convenience stores. The two types you hear about are internal and external. External being the ones that you had mentioned as an overlay. It is something that goes on the pin pad. And I noticed that recently I went to 7-Eleven, and the ATM, I noticed they now have something that is attached, so you couldn't do an overlay. And it also shields anybody that's trying to look at what your PIN is. So I noticed that might stop some of those external type of skimmers. And they also can be applied at the gas pump, where my understanding is they're thin enough that they fit over the traditional keypad. But they may look a little different. They may be a little looser. They may be a little shinier than the dispenser that is weathered because of the weather. I guess that's where the expression came from, huh? So there might be some things that they are easier to spot. They're easier to stick on, and then largely the criminal comes back and collects the data, although I think there's also RFID technology. But the one I think is causing concern right now related to convenience stores and gas stations are what you'd call internal skimmers. And that's where you open the dispenser door and you insert this device that I guess connects to the payments or bypasses. I don't know exactly what happens, but what happens is everything that the dispenser normally would collect is instead going to the skimmer. And it's harder to see because you can't necessarily notice a loose overlay or something like that. That's the one I think that's causing the most concern. How do I know that my store is safe? So what are the things that both retailers and consumers can do to kind of take a look and say, okay, this store has my best interests and I feel cool with my money here? Yeah,
we get that question all the time. I mean, to your point on the external skimmers, external skimmers do not work well in external environments, right? That's why they love putting them on inside ATMs, because during the day the glue that's on there gets gooey and it starts to sag off, and it just doesn't look like a machine. So when you've got an external skimmer, you're going to focus to something that's temperature controlled so it can kind of withstand itself. In the unattended world, like a fuel pump, you have the ability then to get in and do what is really the ultimate skimmer. The customer, it looks like a normal pump, and it is a normal pump to the external view. But it's got this increasingly small and capable skimmer that's sniffing all the data that's going down the line. Transactions are happening as normal, but it's capturing that stuff. And so it also makes it doubly difficult to go out and say, well, I think I've been skimmed. I think I've got a skimmer in there because everything looks normal. So what NACS and Conexus came up with in 2011 was, as part of the We Care program, we contracted with an intrusion sticker company that produces serialized stickers that if the sticker itself is applied over the opening gap on a door, any door really, you could put it on to protect the meter as well. If it's tampered with, it bleeds and says void. That was great. First thing, because that tells the potential thief, hey, I know that you're out there and I'm looking. Well, thieves don't. They're like competitors. They don't stand still. And so they saw that and they said, well, okay, they've got this sticker, but you know what? I'm going to see if anybody really cares. And so we started to see a rash of slashed open stickers. They'd put the skimmers in. Customers weren't complaining because they didn't know. Skimmers wasn't top headline stuff. And then all of a sudden we were getting skimmers again. So we started saying we'll go out and make sure and do inspections and make sure that they're not slashed and they don't say void. So we started doing that. Then they went and they started buying replicas of our stickers and sticking them on the doors. So we had to move one step ahead, and that's where we are today. Customers are smart enough to know that if they see a sticker and it's old and grungy and busted, they're not going to use your station. It's like having an unclean bathroom, only way out in front. So just going out and replacing the sticker without keeping track of that serial number doesn't work, because now they can buy the stickers and take them off and put another one on. It looks the same, but the serial number invariably is out of spec. So the next step we're taking to get ahead of them is we're working on a mobile application that allows anybody with a gas pump to scan stickers and track the serial numbers. So if I'm standing in front of pump 1 and I scan it with my mobile phone, downloadable from an Android store, the iTunes store. If I scan it and the serial number doesn't come back that's supposed to be there, it's now telling the cashier or the assistant manager who's out there doing the scanning, okay, something changed here. Why? And it forces them to record why it changed. It could have been a service call, something legitimate. But if it's not a service call, and it gives them a prompt that says, hey, you need to look inside this pump, shut it down.
That's really cool. Now, in thinking about the internal skimmers, and you hear people say, well, I don't know, it's a crime that you really can't tell. Now, to install an internal skimmer, there's two ways of doing it. Forcing open the door or somehow having access to the door. Now, if you force open the door, I think whether you're a retailer or whether you're a consumer, if you look at a door and it looks like it's been forced open, that panel that you see at the gas pump, that should be a visual cue that you might want to think twice. Somebody forced this open, whether recently or a bit older, but something is amiss. The other way you get in that is a key of some sort, and whether somebody has access to a key that works at that specific dispenser or whether there's more of a universal key. We won't get into those details, but when there are times you want to open the dispenser fairly frequently. If you're the business, you need to replace the receipt tape. You need to just make sure things are going on. And, of course, you'd want to check for skimmers. So I guess retailers, you're seeing more that are doing that as part of their routine maintenance, and whether it's putting stickers on there or not. But those are some things that are going on right now with progressive retailers to minimize the likelihood that there is something amiss. The idea of the app just takes it to a way new level, and I think is something that is really great news.
Yeah, I mean, we have all this detail-oriented protection out there, and then to expect a cashier or sales associate to go out there and manually write down 9-digit and 10-digit, 12-digit numbers is ridiculous. So how do we automate that? I mean, this is the world where the phone can do pretty much anything. Again, that's just one layer, because security from any type of data intrusion is a multi-layered thing. And what we like to do when we talk to people, we did a webinar December that we took the good, better, best approach, and we had the dispenser companies in there talking about this. And what we described was here's the table stakes thing you do. You mentioned the keys. I've got 3 keys in my desk drawer at home that open every pump in America. So why would you have the same key? So rekey your dispensers. It's very inexpensive. And so the guy like me who's got 3 keys that opens every dispenser can't open yours. Do the stickers. And then once you've done the stickers, make sure they're checked twice a day. It should be you're out there checking to see if the garbage can needs to be emptied. Well, why aren't you also checking to see if the stickers are in place? And then, to your point on the force open, if the pump looks like it's been vandalized, it wasn't some kid just coming in and saying, let's beat up a pump. It was somebody jimmying the pump open because you changed your locks. And so those things are outwardly there. And on your comment about the progressive convenience stores, 2 years ago we had a rash of skimmers at some very high-profile chains that are high-profile because they sell a lot of fuel. And as Willie Sutton said, that's where the bank card numbers are. at the high.
He was talking about card numbers 100 years ago.
That's right. And you'll notice that those people aren't in the news anymore. And that's because they've taken the minimum table stakes, cultural and investment steps to make sure that they're not the target. And what we're seeing anecdotally now in the last 6 months is that these are not the big name chains. They're major role branded, but they're in increasingly rural areas, which speaks of 2 things. They haven't taken the steps, and the high value targets have. And the criminals are getting pushed off into the more marginal markets to do this.
One of the things I hear when reporters will call, they'll say that we got reports of 5 skimmers in our area. Is it an epidemic? And one of the things I'll say is first off, if it's big in your area, it feels really big, but it may not be big. And you can go to that old joke. It's what's the difference between a recession and a depression? Recession is when your neighbor loses his or her job. A depression is when you lose your job. Mm-hmm. It feels really close. But with skimmers, what at least I'm getting the sense or hearing is that it may be a group that'll work an area and they'll work it like locusts until they feel that every possible bit of leaves have been denuded. Mm-hmm. Then they'll move on. So when you see reports of skimming in an area, it doesn't mean it's reflective of the entire country. It's very localized and it hurts. But retailers are taking steps and working with others in law enforcement to minimize this. So is that the case, and who are these groups that are largely responsible for skimmers right now?
It's interesting. The few busts that have been coming down because of this latest rash are pointing to Romanian gangs and also Cuban gangs. So it is organized crime in that respect. The structure, we're not quite sure. The structure seems to be that they have people who are here who are affiliated with these gangs, and then they give them the equipment and cut them loose, right? So it's not U.S. citizens that are doing this because these numbers are getting exfiltrated back to some jurisdiction where they can't be taken off the web. So it's definitely organized. The other thing that we tested a while ago, and I'm still pretty sure is relevant, is you find one skimmer, it's like a cockroach. You've got roaches, and especially on an interstate corridor. You find one along I-95, you can go 10 exits either way and you'll find more. So you're working with fairly high-profile groups to see how we can mitigate this, how we can all work together. And that seems to me that everybody working together to solve the problem instead of necessarily singling out and saying, you need to fix it. I think that's the right way to go. Also, I guess to a certain extent, we need to look at folks who aren't really addressing this efficiently and say, look, these people are. You need to be with us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does get a bit frustrating because the Data Security Committee at Connexus saw this 5 years ago. The tools that we have up there today have been updated, but they haven't materially changed in 5 years. And so the frustration is, how do we get this out to the folks who are out there and get them to understand that they need to take it seriously? And increasingly now, as we're getting outreach from the states, the state associations are calling up and saying, "Hey, I'm in Ohio, and we've got 5 skimmers we've found, and law enforcement is calling this an epidemic, and we want to educate our members." And NACS has a great reach across the country, but we're partnering with the states, and we're partnering with the major oil brands, and any association of retailers. Any group of retailers, whether they're NACS members or not. This is a whole industry problem. And increasingly we're bringing in people like Secret Service. We're bringing in other resources, law enforcement, because it is a partnership. And I dare say it's also a partnership with the banks. Yes, the cards can be better protected by things like PIN and encryption and things of this nature. But the fact is we have the biggest card system in the world, and right now this is the way it is. And it's going to take a collaborative effort of everybody moving together, because I call it, it's kind of like working for the U.S. Forest Service. We need that guy who's sitting up on top of the mountain and sees that little puff of smoke off in the distance, because we need to warn all the other people around that puff of smoke that we think there's a fire there. And it's going to take bank, law enforcement, state association, ethnic buying groups, major oil brands, all working with NACS to call out that fire.
So, final question. What is the one thing you want retailers to know, and what is the one thing you want consumers to know? And maybe they're the same, but what are those 2 big takeaways?
Consumers are smart today. So what I say to most retailers is your brand is absolutely at risk. You can have a pothole in your parking lot, and people will say, geez, he doesn't take care of his place. You get on the local news as a place where people are breached and debit accounts have been cleaned out, and you are lower than dirt, and your brand is going to get dragged through it, and that's going to cost you more money than you ever thought it could. So don't be that victim. Take the extra time, do the table stake stuff, and just show your customers that you care, right? We care. If you're a consumer, if it looks odd, walk away. There are plenty of other gas pumps in the world. And if you see one that's been jimmied, you see one that's got scratches around where the key lock is. If you see broken security tape, do the store a favor. Tell them your pumps look unsafe, but don't use those dispensers. Go across the street. Go somewhere else, because that's the best way to make sure that retailers pay attention to it, as it becomes a key determinant of retail business.
And you have some of these tools on the Connexus website.
Connexus website, as well as the We Care section of the NACS Online website. These are all publicly available, but we've worked very closely with security experts in our industry to make sure we've got the best stuff, and we're always updating it.
And anybody interested, I recommend 2 great resources: the NACS website, nacsonline.com/skimming, and also Connexus has tools at conexxus.org.
You've been listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. For more information about the National Association of Convenience Stores, go to nacsonline.com.